Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode of myself and, of course, the incomparable 9/11 researcher, author, and blogger, interviewer, Leonardo Salvaggio. Leo, hey, listen, how you doing, pal? What's going on? A lot going on.
Well, I'm doing fine. Everything is normal here in Italy, and thanks for inviting me again, and thanks for your kind words. It's always a pleasure to have our collaborations once a month or so. Thank you. So thank you for inviting me.
No, listen, these collabs have been utterly fantastic. I love doing these because I love talking to like-minded people who are, ardent researchers of these areas, and they're more relevant now than they ever before because as we're seeing in the Middle East, it's on fire, and we got a lot to talk about. And also, too, some of these incidents that we're talking about, like today, the Khobar Towers attack, and of course, the latest news regarding Florida Bulldogs breaking article regarding Scotland Yard's evidence linking Omar al-Bayoumi to the 9/11 terrorist attacks with information regarding pre-knowledge. And it's not something that we should forget about. It's something that should be in the public discourse today because, a lot of this stuff is relevant to understanding the terrorist mindset and also how foreign policy analysts use this to shape Western and Middle Eastern foreign policy regarding it, and also terrorists to basically take advantage of the situation of a lack of security and a lack of intelligence sharing. Regarding this incident, I remember this is one of my very first articles I ever wrote on Medium, Leo, back in the day. I think it was like 2018 when I first made my Medium account, and I wrote about the Khobar Tower. It's a very short article, but in general, um, the Khobar Towers attack was first of all, the Khobar Towers was a housing complex, and it was in the city of Khobar in Saudi Arabia. I think it was Khobar is located north of the country. I think I could be wrong, but it's nearby the King Abdulaziz Air Base, and it's the headquarters of Daharam. And it's near also, I think another reason why they attacked the airbase because it was near the Saudi Aramco company headquarters in Daharam. And the building was called 131. And it reminded me so much of Oklahoma City because if you see pictures of the Khobar Towers in Oklahoma City, it looks similar in how the front facade of the building is like completely gone, but the building is still standing, part of it anyway, and you could see the columns and the rows of the buildings and the height of the building. Um, there was a truck bomb that was detonated next to Building 131, and it was housing members of the United States
Air Force.
uh, Air Force. Thank you, Air Force, which is
You're welcome.
primarily a like a fighter squadron inside the building. I heard there was coalition fighters there, and these were people that were assigned to the um, operations Southern something, Operation Southern something. I forgot. It was also that area was a no-fly zone and was used part in regards to in southern Iraq. Interestingly enough, the individuals that were involved with the Mardim operations were seen by a night watchman who was nearby. And according to this night watchman, he actually was looking at the driver of the truck and he was smiling as he was driving the truck. Of course, this guy was a Mardim operator because he blew himself up, which is really probably horrifying for him to see that. Um, and it happened during the night when a lot of these people were in bed. It happened, I think, at like around 9:30 p.m. And it was a guy driving a fuel tanker, and it was a slow trek toward the entry point of Khobar Towers, where the security checkpoint denied the man entry because he didn't have the proper authorization. He couldn't tell you where he was going, and the truck pulled out and left. But about, I'd say, 20 minutes later, the same tanker truck, um, another scout vehicle drove in an adjacent parking lot next to the building. This actually, by doing this, that checkpoint actually saved probably everybody in the building because it basically had to go a little bit further east of the building to, get near the building. And what happened was because they were next to the parking lot of the building, it was only like a like a flimsy chain link fence and small trees, and the guy left his truck and joined his companions in the dots in the truck, the other car. I don't drive, so I don't know what the other car was, but they leave, and the U.S. Air Force security policeman, um, Guerrero, I forgot this guy, he's a hero. He noticed the idle truck from atop the tower, and the suspicions are warranted to enter back down the building. And he warned numerous personnel because he said, "Where did this truck come from?" And he didn't realize where the truck was coming from. Now, while he was inside the building, he was at the west side of the building. Everybody was coming down the stairs. And the reason why I'm pointing this out is because as they were going down the building, the blast initiated. And these people down the stairways were, because the stairways were made out of like pure marble and concrete, they survived. But anybody that was in the barracks were killed. And the explosion was tremendous. The size of the explosion created was like an intense dust storm, and it just this huge like blast. It like there was that security checkpoint that saw the guy smiling before he backed out. Said that it looked like he was looking at the surface of the sun, and he like jumped down. He just like shielded his eyes from it. The the military vehicles that were parked to the left of the building 131 didn't suffer direct impact from the debris, but they were damaged by the intensity of the shockwave that came about, and it blew out every window for a mile in all directions, actually. And within a few hours of the blast, the crater began to fill with salt water from the Persian Gulf. That's how deep the blast hole was. It was freaking enormous. And there was an investigation by the FBI, and it just happened that only 19 people were killed and about 500 people were injured. Now, this could have been a whole lot worse, Leo, basically. And if you want to add any details to the blast, to the attack itself, go right ahead.
Well, since on our discussions we always talk about intelligence mistakes, I think it's worth mentioning that we have an antifact
Mm.
here because the year before, in November 95, a car bomb was blasted in Riyadh, close to a building where the US Army was training the Saudi National Guard.
Oh, yes.
And after that event, they got an anonymous message saying, "We don't want you here, guys. We want you out of the Arabic Peninsula because you are invaders and you are infidels." And that is a clear example of intelligence mistake because they were warned. Also, while I was restudying this case to make this video with you, I also found an incredible amount of articles by the New York Times in which
Ah,
they mention how many threats they got and that there was no response because probably they downplayed the ability of these attackers to create bombs. So let's just take a step back. You also mentioned security, and probably intelligence did not work, but security did somehow work. Because one thing that you mentioned is that this bomb truck wanted to enter the complex, but they could not because the security interest sent them away. But also, we have to remember that they put concrete jersey barriers all around the building, and that barriers not only prevented the attackers from getting closer, but their role is also to push upward the energy of the explosion. Therefore, without
oh,
those barriers, even if it wasn't that close to the truck bomb itself. Without those barriers, probably 132 building would have collapsed. We'll never know for sure, but this is very likely. And in terms of how violent the explosion was, we also have to keep in mind that the light was seen in Bahrain, which is 32 kilometers away or 20 miles, since most of our viewers right now are Americans. So yes, I think that we have mistakes made as far as intelligence, and probably the security was good enough, but not was pretty good, but not good enough.
yeah. Let me.
Uh, Go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. No, no. I
No,
was just going to follow up on that. That's. I'm glad you brought this up because regarding the New York Times. I remember there was an article. I shared this with DJ Thermodetonator, another fantastic 9/11 researcher. And this was just like a year ago when we were talking about the Khobar Towers attacks. And basically, the New York Times um, had basically found that the CIA were got intelligence about a phone call between Osama bin Laden and, at the time, the emir of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad in Cairo, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, where bin Laden actually, where Zawahiri called to congratulate bin Laden on the operation because actually this was tied to bin Laden, and the FBI tried to investigate this matter. In Saudi Arabia, basically, with their own investigation, they stonewalled Director Louis Freeh, the director of the FBI at the time. Now, King Fahd, and who's the king of Saudi Arabia, and Louis Freeh had a very good relationship, actually. They were decent friends over the years. But basically, the kingdom itself ran their own, the Mahabet, as they're called, or the General Intelligence Directorate, under Prince Turki bin Faisal, actually stonewalled the FBI, and they hastily arrested a bunch of individuals and executed them, just like killed them before there was even a full investigation. And Free, while the FBI was inside Saudi Arabia in Dhahram, they tried to interview neighbors in the neighboring towns of the Khobar Towers, and they would not. And according to Louis Free, later on in his intelligence reports, he basically said that the Mahabet went to these people the days prior and warned them not to be cooperative with the FBI. I don't know. And I think this basically comes down to it, Leo, is that the Saudi Arabia, in the wake of the bombing, wanted to stonewall the FBI regarding their knowledge of radical militants in the country and the problem thereof, in which a lot of these Saudi kingdom princesses were very sympathetic to bin Laden and the jihadist culture inside the country. And look, official inquiries about bin Laden during this time went unanswered. And there was a U.S. probe into bin Laden at the time, and this is the mid 90s, when bin Laden was basically just heard of by the FBI, but was well known to the CIA. But the United States didn't pressure the Saudi Arabia, just like they didn't, after 9/11, right? They didn't pressure, and they still tend to protect them now. But even back then, Leo, like the United States government was very sensitive to Saudi Arabia because they were still trying to build a clear relationship in trying to control the oil market, from Great Britain and Russia and everybody else. And there's a story, and I remember this specifically when C-SPAN interviewed Robert Baer, and the former CIA case officer that was assigned to Saudi Arabia once. I think it was like in the summer of 2000. I don't know the month. Robert Baer actually gives a list to the CIA about a bunch of Al Qaeda terrorists that were located in Yemen and Saudi Arabia. And at this time, you would think that the CIA would be definitely interested in this list because this is the height of where, everybody's hair was on fire regarding terrorism and trying to obtain as much intelligence. One, the CIA showed no interest in it. And, it makes you wonder why. But yes, this is definitely something that we see time and time again, Leo, regarding, intelligence reports prior to a terrorist attack, warnings that went unheeded, and the intelligence that probably could have prevented attacks were not acted on. And again, here we are. It just we could trace it back to the 98 East Africa bombings, the US's Cole bombing, the meeting in Malaysia, the 9/11 attacks, and now Khobar Towers. What else did you want to talk about regarding this?
I think that it's worth mentioning that probably we can blame it more on the Saudis than on the Americans as far as the intelligence mistakes, because
Absolutely.
there were reports of this complex being surveilled and of people running around and trying to find out if they could get inside or not. That happened for multiple months, but Saudi Arabia did not do anything. And the investigations that you mentioned that was carried out by, of course, the FBI, the CIA, the DSS being the diplomatic secret service. And of course, the U.S. Air Force Special Investigation Unit assessed that the threat was there, but it was underrated, probably by both the American and the Saudis, but in this case, much more by the Saudis, because the Americans could not act. Actually, they could not do anything to increase, other than increasing the security, but they could not do anything to face the threat because that was Saudi Arabia. And I think that it's also worth mentioning that the Saudi intelligence downplayed the ability of these guys from Lebanon to create bombs by assessing that it was childish or boyish. Therefore, I think that this time the guys who made the folks who made the worst mistakes would be the Saudis.
Yeah, I would agree. And look, again, after every terrorist attack, there's always that initial blame that goes around. And so, what did the Saudis do? They blamed it on Hezbollah, but the FBI knew better. And basically, the intelligence showed that this was done by Islamic militants that were linked to Bin Laden, and they overheard a phone call between Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri and Bin Laden congratulating about the bombing. And according, to the highest levels of the Saudi government, it was carried out by Hezbollah and individuals linked to the brigades in Lebanon and in Syria at the time. One unnamed, by the way, unnamed U.S. official who didn't want to go on record, and I'm reading this from the New York Post at the time, one U.S. official claimed that it now seemed it was not an isolated case, that there was an organization of violent opponents whose members are loosely connected, organized in semi-independent cells like violent fundamentalist movements in the Arab world located in countries like Yemen and Saudi Arabia, end quote. And listen, I don't think, were there Hezbollah attacks against, Saudi Arabia in itself? Yes. Why? Because they oppose the Wahhabi militants because of ideological differences. Now, this has been going on since, the 1970s when Islamic militants were beginning to become more prominent and the Arab socialists were dying out. Now, according to the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, John something, I want to say his name was John Shill something, Shaluski. I'm not going to say his name correctly because of my New York accent. But in April of 1997, the Joint Chiefs actually said that the Pentagon did not have evidence about the bombing to consider retaliation because you got to figure this was a military installation. This is the U.S. target, and it's considered like an act of war when you attack a U.S. installation either in the United States or abroad. But they said that at the time they didn't have enough evidence to show that this was connected to any militant organization or a country. Now, of course, this is absurd in its own face because the FBI just had decently enough information regarding this being conducted by Saudi militants connected to the kingdom through sympathizers within the kingdom. And that's why Saudi Arabia basically covered this up, killed all the people that were allegedly involved and said, all right, that's it. We killed the people that were involved. Meanwhile, there was an indictment. It was an indictment in the summer of 2001 at the same time with the help of a former al-Qaeda informant, Jamal al-Fadl. And the indictment was filed in the Southern District of New York, which me and you, Leo, were both familiar with, charging a number of individuals with murder and conspiracy related to the Khobar Towers bombing. And these people have not been caught. And they are, and this is from the New York Times, Ahmed Ibrahim al-Mughassi, who's still wanted, Hani al-Sagari, who's previously been in U.S. custody but deported to Saudi Arabia. He's nowhere to be found. Ali al-Huri, Ibrahim al-Yaqub, and Abdul Qasim al-Nasser. These are the people. There's a bunch of others. But Saudi Arabia also responded to that article by New York Times and said that 11 of the people that were indicted in the Southern District of New York are actually in Saudi prisons. So that defeats the argument, Leo, of them blaming Hezbollah. Meanwhile, these are the people that were involved with the bombing, connected to Saudi militant circles, connected to bin Laden, that are actually in Saudi prisons. And the country refused, on orders from the president of the United States at the time, Clinton, tried to speak with King Fahd at the time about extraditing them. And this would have been really groundbreaking because at the time we didn't have a rendition treaty until a year later when we renditioned the very first person, which was an Egyptian militant connected to a terrorist attack against individuals that were connected with the U.S. consulate. But this would have been something else had the United States basically extradited these people back. The Saudi Arabia said, no, we're not going to do that. And the government has not made a public outcome or outcry or any type of investigation about with the whereabouts of these individuals, even at the current time. So I think it's ridiculous that, the Saudi Arabian government basically covered up this incident as best as they can so that they can protect the problem of Wahhabi militant organizations inside the country. But if you have any more thoughts on this, I'd like to hear it.
Well, actually, I think that this case is pretty confusing as much as you did that, because as far as I understood, it was Saudi Hezbollah. So they were not totally wrong in
Okay,
saying it
yes,
was
that's correct.
Hezbollah,
That's
but
correct.
but
That's correct.
actually it's
Correct.
also Saudis. And we also have, of course, the Iranians
Right.
organizing, paying,
Yep.
and approving for this plan. The role of Al-Qaeda is very disputed because you're right in saying that bin Laden was complimented for smuggling weapons into Saudi Arabia. And that was also the time when Al Qaeda was relocating from Sudan to Afghanistan for the second time. So the 9/11 Commission says that Al Qaeda had a role in this attack, and the role is still unknown. And we also have to keep in mind that to add even more confusion, that the Secretary of Defense William Perry in 2007 said that Al Qaeda was responsible for this attack. So we have multiple versions, and also sometimes they overlap because let's keep in mind that we said during our latest episode that. The 1998 attacks in Africa were the first ones actually carried out by Al Qaeda. So we cannot expect in 96 to have an attack carried out actually by Al Qaeda alone. So it was a combination of multiple forces, probably. We're sure that Saudi Hezbollah were in it. We're sure that Iran was behind it. We're to a certain degree sure that Al Qaeda had a role. Which role we still don't know, and we might never know.
I'm glad you brought up the Saudi Hezbollah group, right? So while you were talking, I went to look up this group, and I always forget, man. This is good. I'm glad you corrected me on this. It's Hezbollah al-Hijaz. It's actually a militant Shia organization that's based in Saudi Arabia, and that's really crazy when you think about it, because the ideological differences between Sunni and Shia are none more pronounced than in Saudi Arabia, and actually they're in the Eastern Province. Um, Interestingly enough, though, Leo, you bring up another interesting point, and this is something often forgotten, even by someone like myself. Yes, that's right. Bin Laden actually was on his way to Afghanistan from the Sudan and made that move, of course, in May of 1996. And it was through U.S. pressure by sanctioning President Omar al-Bashir and putting enough pressure on the National Islamic Front, headed by Hassan al-Turabi, to oust bin Laden from the country. And he lost millions of dollars because he spent a lot of, I think he spent somewhere between 20 to $25 million on the agriculture in the country itself. Now, the entourage with bin Laden moved to Afghanistan and basically made the point that they might have been chased out by the Sudan. This is an underreported issue where Saudi Arabia and the United States pressured the Sudanese government to basically chase bin Laden out so that, this was like bin Laden, leaving the country with his tail between his legs. And bin Laden took it personally and was involved at some level with the bombing of Khobar Towers. Now, the bombing happened a month later. So this would have been really just, it goes to your point about, Al Qaeda being heavily involved. Yeah, it probably was at some level, maybe some very small direction by bin Laden. Maybe, like some influence was in there. But the Saudi authorities were at pains to implicate, this Shia Hezbollah group, Hezbollah al-Hijaz, to blame Iran, who backed the attack, since the embarrassing truth was basically that the problem of homegrown militancy in the country itself. and they didn't want to give the impression that the United States was not welcome in their country by a problem that they helped to facilitate through the imams and like people like Ibn Baz and others that created these Wahhabi organizations through the ideology of Wahhabism. That's what created groups like Al Qaeda and Abu Sayyaf in the Philippines and Jem Islamiyah in Indonesia, and helped to create some of the worst terrorist attacks the world has ever seen. But yeah, I think that's a very sound point in regards to just how much involvement bin Laden had. I think was very, very minimal at best. But I'll let you have final thoughts on it.
We'll never know for sure, Adam. Maybe it's very minimal, as you say. Maybe it was wider than that. We'll never know for sure. We just know that I would just say it's very likely that they had a role. Which
Hmm.
role, we don't know yet.
Yes, but also we wanted to talk about the latest breaking article. I mean, Leo,
Absolutely.
we can both agree Florida Bulldog is the best outlet regarding the latest news regarding 9/11 in Saudi Arabia in the Southern District of New York. Court case, once again, through Robin Swan. Another article comes out, but with Dan Christensen, about Scotland Yard releasing new information, secret records from the probe of Omar al-Bayoumi. I'll let you lead off on this.
Well, as you said, there's a new article of the Florida Bulldog, that is an online newspaper which still covers the Saudi involvement in 9/11, about this new evidence released by Scotland Yard about al-Bayoumi. I think that we need to see these new pieces of information in the right context, because a couple of months ago we had that episode of 60 Minutes with al-Bayoumi, and I think that the picture is now clearer, but we have to combine the pieces, because what we understood last year and even a few months ago with 60 Minutes is that it was that al-Bayoumi was not only involved with American Airlines 77, which crashed into the Pentagon, but also with United 93, because he was shooting videos at the US Capitol. That was very likely the target of that plane. Now we know, based on this evidence, that it was also connected with the World Trade Center attacks. Because what they found, one of the things that they found in his house in Birmingham is a World Trade Center brochure with indications and designs of the complex. So now we know for sure that this guy had a role in the whole attack against the United States. So I don't think that I'm wondering now how come he did that. And I think that right now the most likely explanation was that he knew what these guys were doing, and that he had a role in the planning somehow. We still don't know. We have to ask him directly, but I think that now we also know that he was involved in the attacks in New York. And another thing that is worth mentioning is that they found in his PCs an image called helicopters.psp, if I remember well, which
Hmm.
included a
Yes.
hidden message with a technique known as steganografia for my Italian friends, which allows to hide a message inside an image, meaning that if you here and there slightly change the color of a pixel, that little bit you're changing, that is, of course, the rightmost one, so the least significant one, can contain an information. So the value that you give to that bit is either a letter that you want to write a sentence, or either a value, the difference of the two values, the standard one and the new one, might be the letter that you're trying to write. By adding multiple pixels in that image, you can create a sentence. And by doing that, the image is so slightly altered that it's impossible to distinguish just by seeing at it. And that sentence that he hid in that image said something along the lines of, I tried to bring a knife with me on the plane and I succeeded, meaning, of course, that it was part of the planning, because this is a dry run. And I think that this new article also adds some new evidence to what we already know. Omar al-Bayoumi was part of the planning of the overall attack in the two cities.
Yeah, and listen, look, just to add to that, they found additional information and this is actually, we don't know the details of it because it's sealed under a court-approved protection order, and it's 67 new exhibits, actually. Um, but the reason why we know it was that much because under the terms of that protective order, which was issued at the request of the FBI, an attached schedule compiled by the Metropolitan Police in Scotland Yard offered a brief description of each exhibit. And one of them was the message that you talk about, which was embedded in an image file found in an unrelated case in 2004 called Operation Rhyme, which was a probe leading to the arrest of an alleged Al Qaeda member named Dihirim Barrow and a bunch of other guys. And Barrow told members of the Scotland Yard, or the investigators at Scotland Yard, that he personally had been handpicked by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to be involved with the 9/11 attacks. And also, I'm sorry, not with the 9/11 attacks, but other terrorist attacks in the United States and in the United Kingdom. Now, I remember years ago, many years ago, that the CNN broke an article regarding information that came from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed under torture. Now, take this with a grain of salt because he was tortured. And there was like over 83 terrorist attacks that he had planned. And I don't believe that it was that many. I believe that there were some terrorist attacks that he was planning on. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was known as an operational planner. That's why Al Qaeda was literally dying to get this guy involved with the military committee in Al Qaeda, and he refused because Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's an egotistical maniac and didn't like taking orders. He actually liked giving them, but he needed money, and he needed money for the 9/11 planes operation. That's why he joined Al Qaeda. Nevertheless, um, we don't know what the hidden messages are because, like I said, it's under court seal. And the Scotland Yard investigators said that when they viewed the digital message in forensic software, the raw data of the image file contained message, like you said, it was stenography. And I remember doing a video about the article itself, and I was having a hard time saying that word. Um, the message, now this was actually the only type of message that was actually shared by Scotland Yard. And I'm going to quote you. I'm reading the article now. It says the message read, and this is part of a long message. Message read, quote, for your information, I have taken a knife and bag on board prior to the WWTC attacks, and there was no security checks whatsoever. Also, the perimeter fence that goes around the tarmac was not electrocuted, end quote. And I thought this was a big deal, Leo, because I didn't think about this, was that for them to put weapons on board or for them to look at the lacks of security in airlines, right? I never thought that you would have individuals going over the fences around, say, in Logan or at LaGuardia or at JFK or at Dulles. And I forgot that a lot of these airports are nearby rivers and streams and whatnot. And, it would make sense to have fences around these areas. But what's stopping them from being penetrated by nefarious individuals? I never really thought of that until I read this article. I was like, wow, man, that's right. That's another way to get inside these planes or to surveil security lapses of certain airline industries regarding how to go about, attacking these planes by either, putting weapons on board or by, surveying whether there's security in the tarmac areas of these airports. But I thought the article was fantastic, and enough is that even though it couldn't really go into detail because of the lack of information that was public because of the court order seal, it basically talks about more evidence against Omar al-Bayoumi, Leo. And I happen to agree with you now that Bayoumi was definitely involved with the pre-planning of the 9/11 attacks. But Leo, my question would go back to you. Is he alone? Who else could we basically say that now is involved with the 9/11 attacks on the Saudi side?
No, well, he led the team. He was part of a
Right.
team. And so there
Yeah.
are multiple individuals that were linked to him, and I would say that the second most famous would be this guy by the name of Osama Basnan, if I'm pronouncing his name
Yes.
correctly. I'm not
Yes.
sure where the accent
Yes.
falls on his last name. Who pretty much supported al-Bayoumi. They worked together. That was a team effort, and I remember also it being mentioned by the 9/11 Commission report that Osama Basnan also said something like, "I did much more for the hijackers than Omar al-Bayoumi did." We have multiple people. I also have on my blog an FAQ page about who's who of the Saudi agents supporting the hijackers. I can't remember all their names by heart right now, but that was definitely done by a team.
Yeah, I happen to agree. I think the individuals involved are people that we've covered before, like Fahad al-Tamari, Osama Basnan, and of course, the guys who are who were in charge of them, like Muassad al-Jara and Mu'tib al-Saderi and Adel al-Sadan, and God knows how many people were else involved that we don't know about yet that are still redacted in the Operation Encore files, Leo. Um, when you read the article, Leo, were you surprised at more information that was uncovered by Scotland Yard? And were you surprised at the lack of interest by the FBI in relating this information to the public itself? Are you shocked by this?
Well, what shocked me most was finding out that this person, Omar al-Bayoumi, was also connected to the attacks in New York,
Yes.
because that changed the whole picture, to me at least. Also, if you combine it with the 60-minute video of last April. Was I shocked about the FBI not showing a lot of interest? To be honest, I never wondered. So I don't have an answer for that. But we've been discussing a lot about information not being shared, information being concealed. So I'm not too surprised about all these misses, bits and pieces that could have prevented 9/11 from happening, probably.
Yeah. Do you think it could have disrupted the plot at least partly?
That's a good point. We'll never know for sure. I would say so, yes, at least partially. I don't think that they were rushed. Like, I don't think that they were
Right.
understanding that the wheels were coming off the cart, therefore they had to rush. No, I don't believe that. Also because such a planning is very important, takes a lot of resources. Therefore, replanning such a big thing is not easy at all. But I think that some of the teams could have stopped. Maybe the whole plan could have stopped. I would say so. But I would also add that's like playing the Monday morning quarterback, because that would be like
Yeah.
saying
Good point.
if everything went right, we wouldn't have made any mistakes.
Right. Um, Interestingly enough, I wanted to also mention this too, um, that in that article by Florida Bulldog, I found this to be interesting, and I made it a point when I did a video myself regarding the article. One of the pieces of evidence that was found and that was labeled in the court-ordered seal was that they found a camcorder video. It's labeled New York City camcorder video, and it's an hour and 20 minutes long, and that's all it says. And I'm like, wow, I wonder what the heck they were filming in that 1 hour and 20 minutes. And like, were they filming the World Trade Center? Were they filming the Jacob Javits building? Were they filming, the Brooklyn Bridge or the Empire State Building? I don't know, but I would love to get this. But like I said, it was an exhibit feature recovered during the Operation Rhyme that was linked to Diranim Barrow, which led to this revealing evidence that was found in Bayoumi's home. There was also interesting videos that were found regarding the History Channel's program regarding the stock exchange, and a 5-minute clip of from the film Die Hard with a Vengeance. And I found that to be interesting. Well, I wonder what the hell clip that was relating to. Um, Very interesting stuff. It's weird, too, when you think about it. And also, there was other, I had just met, before we started recording, I had just met for the first time um, our friend Mark Rossini, the former counterterrorism FBI agent that was tasked to the Bin Laden issue station, codename Alex Station. And I'm not going to tell you where I met him. You know, it wasn't he has a house here in New York, not too far from me here in Westchester, and we were talking about Omar al-Bayoumi and the latest evidence that was uncovered regarding him and where to go from here. In fact, he told me that he's meeting with people from Creedler and Creedler to talk about the latest updates regarding the court case in the Southern District of New York. And Mark is a great guy. You know, he's a fantastic guy. And we talked for about 2 hours nonstop. Um, but I don't know where this is going to go, to be honest with you. But I'll let you have the last word regarding it. Do you think, Leo, that the Southern District of New York, which hasn't made up their mind regarding whether the additional evidence previous to this relating to Saudi Arabia will be going forward. What are your thoughts overall on this? Are you hopeful?
Well, I think that this is more on journalists, investigative journalists, than it is on attorneys, because I mean, how do you bring to justice Omar al-Bayoumi? It's just impossible because he lives in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia will never hand him over. So I think that it's on people like Robin Swan, as you mentioned, the Florida Bulldog, and other investigative
Yes.
journalists investigating that. And what people like you and I can do is just spread the word and make it as known as possible to the people worldwide. As far as seeing Omar al-Bayoumi brought to justice, I'm very skeptical because Saudi Arabia does not want to collaborate. And to be honest with you, I think that President Biden did a good job by declassifying a lot of documents with
Yes.
this executive order in 2021 and the years after. But other than that, I haven't seen much. I mean, President Donald Trump was in Saudi Arabia a few weeks ago. No one ever mentioned Omar al-Bayoumi. It never crossed the mind of anybody other than me, you, and a handful of other folks.
Yeah, that's a really good point, by the way. That's interesting to note. Not a peep regarding 9/11. And by the way, isn't that ironic, Leo? At just in 2016, he ran on that. Like, I'm going to reveal the 9/11 investigation itself, and he's going to do more to reveal public documents, and not a peep from this guy. Not a peep at all.
Well, he said the
Um,
same about JFK, right? And
yes,
the
yes,
documents that were disclosed have nothing to do with the murder.
at all.
Not at
At
all.
all.
Not at
And he
all.
gave also the Epstein files. He gave it to like these very fringe, all media, right wing, all media accounts like Libs of TikTok and DJ Drano. And I'm like, God's sakes, what the heck? I'm sure there's nothing, even remotely revealing in those binders itself. But I'm surprised to hear that you, an optimist, basically being pessimistic regarding the future of a profitable or actionable investigation, and of course, judicial prosecution of anyone involved with the 9/11 attacks. But believe it or not, I happen to agree, and I think this will unfortunately go in the way of JFK, in the annals of history quietly. But this is the reason why we do videos like this, Leo, and I'm
Yeah.
very happy to do them with you, and in trying to reinvigorate, the public consciousness regarding the importance of 9/11 and areas relating to it by, you know, relating to you, information that is pertinent, and then maybe hopefully getting enough attention paid to and having the public consciousness enough attention to maybe have a new investigation, maybe so. Otherwise, why are we doing stuff like this? You know,
Absolutely. That's why
um,
we're doing that.
correct. But hey, Leo, thanks again for doing this collab with me.
My
And
pleasure.
tell everybody where they can find you. And I'll link, of course, your stuff down below.
Well, you can find me on my YouTube channel. It's called Leonardo Salvaggio. You can just search for my name on YouTube. And I also have a blog totally dedicated to 9/11. It's called Undicisettembre, which means September 11th in Italian. It's just spelled in letters. So if you Google my name with the 9/11, you'll find it easily. And Nowadays, it's not only in Italian. I have all the articles both in Italian and English, so I'm making my research also available for the American readers.
Awesome stuff. And I'm going to have everything linked in the description anyway. So listen, Leo, I'll see you next month. And thank you again for everybody for watching, and take care and have a great weekend.
Thank you.